But will you tell these fools I'm not crazy? Make them listen to me before it's too late!
Invasion of the Body. Snatchers didn't just terrify audiences in 1956, it changed them. What started as a low-budget B movie, filmed in 19 days, became one of the most analyzed films in cinema history. But behind the paranoia on screen was chaos behind the camera. The studio gutted the ending, the director fought to keep it dark, and one actor, he kept falling asleep during his own terror scenes. These are 20 weird facts about Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And the bonus, there's a scene that was shot but never explained, and it still haunts film scholars today. Number 1. The film almost didn't exist. Director Don Siegel was exhausted, burned out from churning out forgettable studio pictures year after year. He'd directed crime dramas, westerns, and B-movies that paid the bills but didn't satisfy his soul. When producer Walter Wanger approached him with a sci-fi script about alien pods replacing humans, Siegel almost said no. He thought science fiction was cheap, predictable, beneath him. But then he read Jack Finney's source novel, The Body Snatchers, and something clicked. This wasn't about monsters or spaceships. It was about loss, about watching the people you love become strangers, about a world where you can't trust anyone, not even yourself. Siegel saw the potential for something darker, something that would crawl under the audience's skin and stay there. He agreed to direct on one condition: complete creative control. The studio, desperate to fill their release schedule, said yes. They had no idea what they were about to unleash. What they thought would be another throwaway alien movie became a masterclass in paranoia, a film so unsettling that critics are still debating what it really means. Siegel didn't just make a movie, he made a warning, and it started with a director who almost walked away. Number 2. Kevin McCarthy wasn't the first choice. The lead role of Dr. Miles Bennell was originally offered to someone with more star power, someone the studio thought could sell tickets. But scheduling conflicts got in the way, and the role opened up. McCarthy was a stage actor, respected but not famous, the kind of performer who disappeared into roles rather than commanding attention. When he auditioned, he didn't try to be heroic. He played Miles as a man slowly unraveling, someone watching his world collapse in real time. Siegel saw something in that vulnerability, that quiet desperation. He cast McCarthy on the spot. And McCarthy threw himself into the role with an intensity that surprised everyone on set. Between takes, he'd sit alone, running lines, building the character's growing paranoia. He didn't want to play a hero fighting aliens. He wanted to play a man losing his grip on reality. That choice transformed the entire film. Miles isn't action hero material. He's exhausted, confused, terrified. He runs because he doesn't know what else to do, and that made him real. McCarthy later said the role haunted him for years because he'd tapped into something genuine, a fear that anyone could feel. The fear of being alone in a world that stopped making sense. The studio wanted a star. They got something better. A man who felt like he could be your neighbor, your doctor, your friend. Right up until he wasn't.
But will you tell these fools?
Number 3. The pods were a nightmare to build. The special effects team had never created anything like them before. These weren't robots or monsters in rubber suits. They were half-formed duplicates of human beings emerging from giant seed pods in various stages of completion. The crew started with clay sculptures molding faces, torsos, limbs in grotesque detail. But clay cracked under the lights. It sagged. It didn't look organic. So they switched to foam latex, building life-sized replicas of the actors that could be manipulated, posed, filmed in extreme close-up. The process took weeks. Every pod duplicate had to be crafted by hand, painted to match skin tones, fitted with wigs made from real human hair. And the pods themselves, those enormous alien seed cases, were constructed from papier-mâché and wire frames, then covered in organic-looking tendrils and membranes. The problem? They smelled. The materials used to create the slimy, wet texture gave off a chemical odor that made the soundstage unbearable. Actors gagged between takes. Crew members worked with handkerchiefs over their faces. But when the cameras rolled, the effect was perfect. Those pods looked disturbingly real, like something that had grown in darkness, waiting to replace you while you slept. The studio wanted cheap thrills. The effects team gave them nightmares. And every grotesque detail, every carefully sculpted duplicate face added to the film's suffocating sense of dread. Number 4. The town wasn't a set, it was real. Most of Hollywood's sci-fi films in the 1950s were shot on backlots, with painted backdrops and obvious studio lighting. But Don Siegel wanted something different. He wanted the film to feel grounded, ordinary, like it was happening in any small American town. So he took his crew to Sierra Madre, California, a quiet suburb east of Los Angeles. The streets, the houses, the shops, all real. The locals didn't mind. They thought it was exciting to have a movie filmed in their neighborhood. What they didn't realize was how the crew would transform their town into something sinister. Siegel shot mostly at night, using harsh, angular lighting that turned familiar streets into shadowy mazes. He positioned cameras low to the ground, making the buildings loom overhead. He cleared the sidewalks of people, leaving the town eerily empty. The effect was chilling. This wasn't some alien planet or distant future. This was Main Street, USA. And that made it terrifying. Because if it could happen here, in this normal, sleepy town, it could happen anywhere. It could happen to you. The residents of Sierra Madre came out to watch the filming expecting a fun sci-fi adventure. What they got was their own neighborhood turned into a nightmare. Siegel later said that was the point. Horror doesn't need exotic locations, it just needs to take something familiar and twist it just enough to make you question everything you thought you knew.
From city to city, an incredible hysterical panic spread.
Number 5. Dana Winter played Becky Driscoll with a secret. She was one of the few actors who understood from the first script read what the film was really about. While others treated it as a monster movie, Winter saw it as a love story ending in tragedy. She played Becky as a woman trying to hold on to her humanity, her emotions, her connection to Miles, even as the world around them became cold and inhuman. But behind the scenes, Winter was dealing with her own struggles. She'd recently ended a difficult relationship and was questioning her future in Hollywood. The vulnerability she brought to Becky wasn't just acting, it was real. Between takes, she'd sit quietly, preparing for the emotional weight of each scene. The terror in her eyes when she realizes what's happening, the exhaustion when they're running for their lives, the heartbreak in the final moments, all of it came from a place of genuine feeling. Siegel noticed. He gave her more close-ups, let the camera linger on her face during critical moments. He knew she was giving him something special. Winter later admitted the role took more out of her than she expected. Playing someone slowly losing the fight to stay human, to stay herself, it drained her. But that exhaustion translated perfectly on screen. Becky's transformation isn't sudden. It's gradual, heartbreaking, inevitable. And Winter made you feel every moment of it. The studio wanted a pretty face to stand next to the hero. They got an actress who understood that the real horror wasn't the aliens. It was losing yourself.
Fantastically powerful, beyond any comprehension.
Number 6. The famous greenhouse scene almost didn't happen. It's one of the most iconic moments in the film. Miles and Becky discovering the pods growing duplicates of their friends, row after row of half-formed bodies lying in the darkness. The scene was intense, terrifying, perfectly executed. But it wasn't in the original script. Don Siegel added it during production, realizing the film needed a visual moment that would cement the horror. The problem? They had no greenhouse, and no budget to build one. The crew scrambled. They found an abandoned nursery in Pasadena, negotiated a one-day rental, and transformed it overnight into an alien breeding ground. The props team brought in the pod duplicates they'd been building, arranged them on tables like a grotesque assembly line. They rigged practical lighting, low and shadowy, to hide the seams in the effects work. When McCarthy and Winter walked into that greenhouse for the first time, they weren't prepared. The duplicates looked too real. The atmosphere was suffocating. Their reactions on camera, that genuine horror, that wasn't entirely acting. Siegel shot the scene in one long day, racing against the rental deadline. No time for multiple takes, no room for mistakes. What ended up on screen was raw, immediate, unforgettable. The studio executives who saw the rough cut were disturbed, not because it was badly done, because it worked too well. They considered cutting it entirely, worried it would be too much for audiences. Siegel fought back. He knew that scene was the heart of the film. the moment where the nightmare became undeniable.
Miles, where do they come from?
Number 7. Kevin McCarthy kept falling asleep, not because he was bored, because he was exhausted. The 19-day shooting schedule was brutal. Long hours, night shoots, emotionally draining scenes. McCarthy was in almost every frame, running, shouting, expressing mounting terror for hours at a time. Between setups, he'd find a corner and close his eyes for just a moment. And sometimes he wouldn't wake up when called. The crew started assigning someone to watch him, to make sure he was awake and ready when cameras rolled. It became a running joke on set. Here was an actor playing a man desperately trying to stay awake, warning everyone that falling asleep meant losing your humanity, and he couldn't keep his eyes open between takes. But McCarthy understood the irony. He even used it. The exhaustion he felt, the bone-deep weariness that fed directly into his performance. Miles Bennell isn't just scared. He's tired. Tired of running. Tired of not being believed. Tired of fighting a battle he knows he's going to lose. That authentic fatigue gave McCarthy's performance an edge of desperation that no amount of method acting could replicate. By the final days of shooting, he looked genuinely haggard, wild-eyed, at the end of his rope, which is exactly what the character needed. Siegel noticed and never let McCarthy rest easy. He'd schedule the most intense scenes late in the day, when exhaustion was setting in naturally. Some directors coddle their actors. Siegel pushed them to the breaking point, and somehow it made the film more real. Number 8. The studio hated the ending. Siegel's original vision was dark, nihilistic, perfectly in line with the film's paranoid tone. Miles Bennell stands in the middle of a highway, screaming at passing cars, trying to warn them about the invasion. Nobody stops, nobody listens, nobody cares. He's alone, defeated, and the pods are winning. Fade to black. Roll credits. It was bleak, it was brilliant. And the studio executives panicked. They said audiences in 1956 wouldn't accept an ending where evil wins. They demanded changes, reshoots, anything to soften the blow. Siegel refused at first. He argued that changing the ending would destroy the entire point of the film, but the studio had final cut. They brought in additional writers, shot new bookend sequences showing Miles in a hospital, telling his story to skeptical doctors. Then, in the final moments, proof arrives that validates his warnings. The authorities believe him. Help is on the way. Hope survives. Siegel was furious. He felt the new ending betrayed everything the film stood for, but he was overruled. When the film premiered with the altered conclusion, critics called it satisfying. Audiences left feeling relieved rather than disturbed, and the movie made money. Years later, Siegel admitted he was wrong to fight so hard. Not because the new ending was better artistically, but because without it, the film might have been buried, forgotten, dismissed as too depressing. The compromise kept it alive. And decades later, film scholars still debate which version is superior.
Listen to me! They're not human!
Number 9. Nobody knew what the pods meant. On set, cast and crew argued constantly about the film's subtext. Some thought it was about communist infiltration, the Red Scare paranoia gripping America in the 1950s. The pods represented Soviet sleeper agents, replacing good Americans with emotionless drones loyal to a foreign ideology. Others saw it as a critique of McCarthyism itself, the witch hunts and loyalty oaths that forced people to conform or be destroyed. The pods were conformity, the death of individuality in a society demanding obedience. Don Siegel stayed quiet. He refused to confirm or deny any interpretation. He'd say the film was about whatever the viewer saw in it, that the best art reflects the fears of its time without spelling them out. But privately, he told friends something different. He said the film wasn't about politics at all. It was about apathy, about a society sleepwalking through life, going through the motions without feeling, without passion, without humanity. The pods weren't communists or conformists. They were us after we'd stopped caring. That ambiguity became the film's greatest strength. It meant different things to different people, different eras. In the 1950s, it was Cold War terror. In the 1960s, suburban alienation. In the 1970s, post-Watergate distrust. And today, it's about losing yourself in a digital age. The film keeps changing because it never told you what to think. It just showed you something terrifying and let your own fears fill in the blanks. Number 10. King Donovan and Carolyn Jones were exhausted. They played Jack and Teddy Belichick, the friends who first discover the pods and spiral into panic. Their scenes required sustained terror, pages of frantic dialogue, physical action, and Siegel kept pushing them harder. In one scene, they had to react to discovering a body double of Jack forming in their basement. The script called for shock, horror, revulsion, but by take 5, they were spent. Siegel didn't call cut. He kept the cameras rolling and started whispering instructions from behind the camera. Make it worse. You've just seen your own death. This is the end of everything. Donovan broke. Real tears, genuine fear, total emotional collapse. Jones grabbed him, held him, her own terror now mixed with concern for her scene partner. And Siegel kept filming. What ended up in the movie wasn't acting anymore. It was raw human emotion, captured in the moment. After the take, Donovan sat in his dressing room for an hour, unable to speak. Jones brought him coffee and sat beside him in silence. Later, they both said that scene changed them. They'd gone somewhere dark, somewhere real, and it took days to climb back out. That's what made Body Snatchers different from other sci-fi films of its era. The terror wasn't coming from rubber monsters or cheap special effects. It was coming from the actors, who'd been pushed to genuinely feel what their characters were experiencing. And you couldn't fake that. You could only survive it. Number 11. The scream heard around the world wasn't scripted. In the film's most famous moment, Kevin McCarthy runs into traffic, pounding on car windows, shouting his warning, "They're here already, you're next." That desperation, that raw panic, it came from somewhere real. Siegel had set up the highway scene on an actual road, stopping traffic for brief windows to film. McCarthy had been working 16-hour days, running on caffeine and adrenaline. When the cameras rolled, something broke inside him. He wasn't acting anymore. He was a man genuinely at the edge, screaming into the void. The drivers in those cars weren't extras. They were real commuters, annoyed at the delay, ignoring the madman in the street. Their indifference wasn't performed. It was authentic, and that made the scene devastating. McCarthy later said he felt something crack during that take, like he'd touched actual despair. Siegel knew immediately he had something special. He didn't ask for another take. He couldn't. Because what McCarthy had just given him couldn't be recreated. It could only be captured once. In that moment, when the line between character and actor dissolved completely. Number 12. The film was shot in 19 days, but it took 6 months to edit. Don Siegel was a perfectionist in the cutting room. He obsessed over pacing, over rhythm, over the exact moment to cut from one shot to another. He wanted the film to feel relentless, suffocating, like the walls were closing in. So he cut scenes down to their essence, removing anything that gave the audience room to breathe. Conversations were shortened. Transitional shots were eliminated. The film moved at a speed that felt wrong, unnatural, like reality was skipping frames. That wasn't a mistake. That was intentional. Siegel wanted viewers to feel disoriented, to experience the same cognitive dissonance Miles feels when his world stops making sense. The editor, Robert Eisen, argued with him constantly. He said the cuts were too abrupt, too jarring. Siegel didn't care. He knew traditional editing rules didn't apply to this film. This was paranoia translated into cinema language, and paranoia doesn't follow rules. When the studio saw the first assembly, they were confused. The film felt off in ways they couldn't articulate, but test audiences loved it. They left the theater anxious, unsettled, exactly the response Siegel wanted. Number 13. The pods made people sick. Not metaphorically, literally. The special effects team had used a combination of latex, chemicals, and organic materials to create the wet, membranous texture of the alien pods. But under the hot studio lights, those materials started to break down. They released fumes that caused headaches, nausea, dizziness. Several crew members had to leave the set. One camera operator passed out mid-take. The studio's safety officer recommended shutting down production until the props could be rebuilt with different materials. But that would cost time and money the production didn't have, so they compromised. Scenes with the pods were filmed quickly, with minimal crew on set and industrial fans running between takes. Actors wore protective masks when they weren't on camera. It was miserable, dangerous, and completely worth it. Because those pods looked disturbingly organic, like something that had grown rather than been built. The studio wanted cheap special effects. What they got were props so convincing they became a health hazard. Siegel later joked that the pods were method props. They didn't just look alien. They felt alien, hostile, wrong, and everyone who worked near them knew it instinctively. Number 14. There's a shot in the film that nobody can explain. It lasts 3 seconds. A man stands in the background of a street scene, perfectly still, watching the camera. He's not credited. No one remembers casting him. And he appears in only that one shot, never to be seen again. Film scholars have analyzed this moment for decades. Some think he's an extra who wandered into frame. Others believe he's a deliberate plant, a visual representation of the pod people already among us. Don Siegel took the secret to his grave. He was asked about the mysterious figure in interviews over the years, and every time, he'd smile and say he didn't remember. But people who knew him said that smile meant something. It meant he knew exactly what he was doing. The figure has become part of the film's mythology. Fan theories range from the reasonable to the bizarre. Was it a friend of Siegel's playing a joke? A studio executive making a cameo? Or something more sinister, a genuine mistake that turned into the perfect accident? Whatever the truth, that 3-second shot has generated more debate than most films' entire runtime. Because it feels intentional. It feels like someone watching, waiting, knowing. Number 15. Sam Peckinpah worked on the film. Not as a director, not yet. He was an unknown dialogue coach and assistant to Siegel, learning the craft, watching how a master built tension with nothing but camera angles and cutting. Peckinpah studied every choice Siegel made. The low angles that made characters look trapped, the long takes that let panic build naturally, the willingness to let silence do the work instead of music or dialogue. Years later, when Peckinpah directed The Wild Bunch and brought his own brand of violent, paranoid cinema to the screen, you could see Body Snatchers in his DNA. That same sense of civilization collapsing, of men realizing too late that the world has changed and left them behind. Siegel and Peckinpah remained friends for life, bonded by this strange little film that nobody expected to matter. In interviews decades later, Peckinpah said Body Snatchers taught him the most important lesson in filmmaking. Trust the audience to feel what you're not showing them. The scariest moments aren't the ones you see. They're the ones that happen in the dark spaces between cuts, in the silence after a scream, in the question that never gets answered. Number 16. The film opened to mixed reviews and modest box office. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Science fiction was supposed to be colorful, adventurous, with clear heroes and villains. This was gray, ambiguous, bleak. Some reviewers praised its technical craft but dismissed it as just another alien invasion movie. Others recognized something deeper but couldn't articulate what. The New York Times gave it a lukewarm review, calling it moderately entertaining. Variety said it was competently made but forgettable. Nobody predicted it would become one of the most influential films in cinema history. But something strange happened over the next few years. People kept talking about it. College students organized screenings. Revival theaters showed it to packed houses. Academics started writing papers analyzing its themes. By the 1960s, Body Snatchers had transformed from a forgotten B-movie into a cultural touchstone. Film schools taught it. Directors cited it as an influence. It had gone from box office disappointment to masterpiece without anyone noticing the transition. Siegel lived long enough to see his vindication, to watch his dark little film take its place in the canon. He never gloated. He just said he knew all along what they had made. Sometimes the audience just needs time to catch up. Number 17. The film was remade 3 times, but the original stayed untouchable. In 1978, Philip Kaufman directed a remake with Donald Sutherland that became a classic in its own right. In 1993, Abel Ferrara made Body Snatchers. In 2007, The Invasion starred Nicole Kidman. Each version reflected its own era's anxieties. Each had its merits, but none replaced the original in cultural memory. There's something about Siegel's version that subsequent films couldn't recapture. Maybe it's the black and white cinematography, stark and unforgiving. Maybe it's Kevin McCarthy's performance, that genuine exhaustion and desperation. Or maybe it's simpler than that. The 1956 version was made by people who didn't know they were making something important. They were just trying to survive a brutal 19-day shoot, to finish on time and on budget. There was no pretension, no awareness of legacy, just craft, instinct, and a director who trusted his vision even when the studio didn't. The remakes came with baggage, with expectations, with the weight of the original's reputation. They were trying to recapture lightning in a bottle, but you can't recapture it. You can only catch it once. Number 18. Kevin McCarthy reprised his role decades later. In the 1978 remake, there's a moment where a man runs into traffic screaming warnings that nobody heeds. It's McCarthy, older but still terrified, delivering the same performance across 22 years. It was Philip Kaufman's tribute to the original, a passing of the torch. But it was also something sadder. McCarthy said filming that cameo felt like stepping back into a nightmare he thought he'd escaped. The character never got peace. He spent 2 decades trying to warn people and they still wouldn't listen. That's the real horror of Body Snatchers. Not that the pods win, that nobody cares until it's too late. McCarthy died in 2010, but his final scream lives forever, frozen in multiple films, multiple decades, always urgent, always ignored. It became his legacy, that image of a man desperate to make people see the danger right in front of them. In retrospect, it feels prophetic, a warning about complacency, about sleepwalking through threats until they consume us, and we still aren't listening. Number 19. The film's influence reached far beyond cinema. Scientists named a phenomenon after it. Body Snatcher syndrome became psychological terminology for Capgras delusion, a condition where people believe their loved ones have been replaced by identical imposters. The film gave psychiatrists a cultural reference point to explain something that had been documented but never named. Authors referenced it. Musicians wrote songs about it. The phrase pod people entered the vernacular as shorthand for conformists, for anyone who'd lost their individuality. Philip K. Dick cited it as an influence on his paranoid sci-fi novels. John Carpenter said it inspired They Live. Jordan Peele mentioned it when discussing Get Out's themes of stolen identity. The film became a template, a foundation other artists built upon, not because it was technically perfect or had a huge budget, because it understood something fundamental about human fear. We're not afraid of monsters from outer space. We're afraid of losing ourselves, of becoming something hollow, something empty, something that looks human but isn't anymore. Body Snatchers articulated that fear better than any film before it, and every paranoid thriller that came after owes it a debt. Number 20. Don Siegel's original ending still exists. Somewhere in a vault, there's a print of the film without the studio-mandated bookends, without the hopeful conclusion. Just McCarthy screaming into the void, defeated alone, as the pods continue their silent invasion. Siegel kept a copy. He showed it to friends, to film students, to anyone who wanted to see his true vision. Those who've watched it say it's devastating, brilliant, exactly what the film should have been. There have been campaigns to release it, to let audiences finally see Body Snatchers the way its director intended. But the rights are complicated, the material's degraded, it may never see official release. And maybe that's fitting. The original ending lives now only in legend, in description, in the memories of the few who've seen it. Like the pods themselves, it exists in the shadows, waiting. A reminder that sometimes the darkest version of the story is the true one, and sometimes the truth stays buried because we're not ready to face it. Siegel made peace with the compromise, but he never stopped believing his ending was right. 70 years later, watching the world embrace dystopian fiction, cynical narratives, unhappy endings, it's hard not to think he was ahead of his time. Bonus fact. There was a scene that never made the final cut. Miles and Becky, in their final moments together before her transformation, share a kiss. But in the original script, that kiss lasted longer, became more desperate, more final. They both knew it was goodbye, knew that when they pulled apart, one of them would be gone, replaced, lost forever. Siegel filmed it that way. 5 takes, each one more emotionally raw than the last. McCarthy and Winter were exhausted, heartbroken, giving everything to this one moment. And when Siegel watched the footage, he made a choice. He cut it down, shortened it, removed most of the emotion. Not because it wasn't good, because it was too good, too devastating. He realized that if he left the full scene in, audiences would never recover. The film would become about that loss, that tragedy, instead of the larger invasion. Sometimes the most powerful moments are the ones you don't show. The kiss that appears in the film is brief, almost businesslike, but because we know there's more, because we can feel what's missing, it hits harder. The full footage still exists somewhere, filed away with other deleted scenes. Film historians would love to see it, but maybe it's better this way. Left incomplete, like the characters themselves. Like all of us, trying to hold on to something that's already slipping away.